Alrighty, we are live. Trying out some new software again. This will be this will be the second broadcast that I do with StreamYards. We had to make a switch on our broadcasting software due to some frustrating technical difficulties and all that. But nevertheless, we are here, ready to get going. Can everybody hear me okay? Let me know if you can't, because that would be awesome to be talking for a minute already and no one can hear me. Got to pull up some stats. We're getting a little ghetto, I guess you could say, with the setup right now, because I've got Team Ravelry up on the same computer that I'm, streaming off of, and I don't have my, extra monitor ready because of all the troubles and stuff like that. But nevertheless, we are here and ready to go. Sound check is good. And I think we can get started with the show. All right. Awesome. So welcome, everybody. So the obvious news of the week is the fact that Michigan won the Big Ten championship. It would be their first. I'm going to bring this up on my phone. Are you serious? All right. So Michigan wins their first Big Ten championship, their first since I believe it was 2004. I believe they shared it with Iowa, as interestingly as that is. You know what? I got to shift this a little bit. Like I said, getting a little ghetto with the setup here. So let's see if this works a little bit better. It'll just be a better setup for me anyway. So, all right. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay. So, as I was saying, Michigan wins the Big Ten championship. It's their first since about 2004, I believe it was. I'm going to check that just in case. Absolute dominant performance against Iowa. Iowa could literally do absolutely nothing. Interesting couple of drives to start the game, though. It actually looked like maybe Iowa would actually come out as the stronger team at first, and they certainly came out with some gusto. They were excited to get going. They marched right down the field just to miss a field goal. They got stopped on third down, stopped behind the line, and then went ahead and missed the subsequent field goal. So bit of a heartbreaking way to end the first drive, and no doubt it stuck with them. I was texting my dad while watching the game, and I texted him and I said, yep, that's demoralizing, and they're not going to be the same team after that. And they had another, I think, one or two more chances to get down the field and put some points on the board. They obviously got the one field goal at one point to make it 14-3. It was only 14-3 going into halftime. They got the ball to start the half. They really could have put something together, but as I said, they were demoralized after missing that first field goal and watching Michigan march down the field a couple of times with a couple of it was Blake Corum had a 62-yard run, I believe, for a touchdown, and then Donovan Edwards with the 60, 70-yard touchdown pass to Cornelius Johnson, I think it was, or Roman Wilson. Yeah, I was watching stuff like that happen, and they're just kind of you could look at them on the sideline and just kind of see in real time them realizing that they're in way out of their league coming into this game. And it's not entirely like they didn't deserve to be there. I mean, they had won 10 games. They didn't have a bad season. They blew out Wisconsin, but and then that was while Wisconsin wasn't very good. Semantics basically. But I mean, it did end up taking Minnesota upsetting Wisconsin to get Iowa there in the first place. So, maybe Iowa is sitting there like we don't actually necessarily deserve to be there. I know it would feel a little bit weird to me, like if Michigan only got to the Big Ten championship because somebody beat somebody else. But if you think about it, that's kind of what happened. Purdue beat Michigan State. But then when it comes down to it, Michigan still had to beat Ohio State in order to get there. So it was still a lot more meaningful. I mean, Michigan's destiny was technically still in front of them. But it, obviously helps that Purdue took down Michigan State. So interesting set of events there. It's Michigan's first since 2004 when indeed they shared it with Iowa. So kind of an ironic turn of events there, but there you go. So as the title of the video suggests, I'm going to be doing a preview for all of the Big Ten East Division college bowl games. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to take basically 5-6 minutes each East Division team. And the reason I'm not doing a full breakdown on the Big Ten championship game is because I got this idea of doing like a 2-part special edition episode on breaking down basically Michigan's entire season. And going through some records, going through some articles and stuff like that, and looking through and seeing if I can put together sort of a 10-month long narrative, live show documentary of sorts. Just kind of talk about what happened, how they got there, how they won it, and then go a little bit more in depth into where they are. And then I'm going to do another in-depth look at Michigan facing Georgia in the college football playoff. What a thing. What a phenomenal season for the Maize and Blue. So we're not going to talk about Michigan against Georgia today, but that is a really interesting game. The line remains 7.5 last I checked in favor of Georgia. Interesting line. Very, very interesting line. I have some thoughts about both Georgia and Alabama, some of them favorable, a lot of them not. And let's just put it at, if Michigan beats Georgia, I think you'd be surprised at how many people wouldn't be surprised. I think it's going to happen. I think that, I'm going to do a full breakdown on it, but I think while I'm looking for the rest of my notes here, I do think that Michigan's going to come into the game a lot more emotionally into it than Georgia will. So, so that's what I think about that. Let's go to Heisman candidates were announced as well. Aiden Hutchinson was among them. Kenneth Walker III was not. Interesting set of events there. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and start off with Maryland because the least will go first. Rutgers and Indiana, not bowl eligible. Indiana finishes the season 2-10, 0-9 in conference. And wow. Considering what they did last year with 5-0 at one point or something like that, and a chance to go to the Big Ten championship game if they beat Ohio State, and they darn nearly did it, but couldn't pull it off. So that's unfortunate for them, but let's go ahead and spend a couple of minutes talking about Maryland. I don't have a ton to say about them because, again, they went 6-6. Let's just a quick look at their schedule. You can follow along on teamrivalry.com. If you go to the homepage, you go down to, schedule, 2021 season, pick the team, it's Maryland, and then show me the schedule, and it will show you the entire 2021 schedule. They start off the season against West Virginia. Somehow or another get a huge, huge victory against West Virginia, 30-24. Talia Tagovailoa, 332 pass yards. Great game. Very, very good game. They follow that up with a complete and total drubbing of Howard, 62-0. If you think about FCS teams this year, I mean, Washington lost to Montana. Florida allowed 50 points, was it, against Fordham? Is that right? It's not the right opponent, I don't think. But Florida allowed something like 40 or 50 points in a half against an FCS team. I want to remember who that was. I can't. Producer, if you're in the chat, look that up for me because I'm curious. You don't have to. Maryland then goes on the road to Illinois and beats the Illini. The Illini would then already have a victory against Nebraska at the time, which, Nebraska coming into the season looked like they would be a good opponent. Illinois beats them in Brett Bielema's literal first game back in the Big Ten, coaching the Illini. And then Maryland makes it 3-0 and beats them. And then Maryland follows that up. They go 4-0 against Kent State, 37-16. Kent State would go on to play Northern Illinois in the MAC championship game. They wouldn't necessarily be competitive in that game. But if you see where Kent State is now, you're looking at Maryland like, wow, that's a really good win. Producer, I was hoping you could look up for me what FCS team scored 40 or 50 points against Florida, the Florida Gators, if you're able to find it real quick. You don't have to. Then it all kind of came crashing to the ground for Maryland. They then have to play number 5 Iowa at home. And if anyone remembers that game, it was not a memorable experience for Maryland. They gave up Talia Tagovailoa threw 5 interceptions. They turned the ball over 6 times. Iowa ended up winning 51-14, and then Maryland follows that up with a loss 66-17 against Ohio State. And then you can imagine that, playing 2 top 10 teams in a row, Maryland's probably pretty tired. Samford, it was 70-52, Florida won. All right, cool. Thank you very much for that. So Samford was the one that put up 52 points against Florida. So FCS teams this year, Maryland being down on their luck, they're tired. You can understand why at this point. They then lose to Minnesota at Minnesota, 34-16. This is Minnesota's chance to kind of start coming back. So you'd think Minnesota's emotionally in it. They do beat the Hoosiers 38-35. Indiana, terrible year. Absolutely nothing on defense from Indiana for sure. And then Maryland goes ahead and hops on another 3-game losing streak against Penn State, 31-14. That's a blowout. Michigan State, 40-21. It kind of looks close at one point. Maryland actually looked like they might be competitive, but Michigan State just too strong on offense. And Maryland doesn't have a defense. Maryland scored a few points. Maryland did score 18 points, a couple of touchdowns. Talia Tagovailoa was putting that team on his back and doing literally everything he possibly could to not look like fools against Michigan. Unfortunately, Michigan's offense and special teams, actually, if you remember, that's the game where Michigan threw the backwards pass on the kickoff return and took that for a touchdown, just to add insult to injury for Maryland. So nothing they could do there. But then Maryland follows up and ends the season with a 40-16 demolishing of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And Rutgers got to be sitting there in Piscataway just kind of wondering, wait, Chris Ash is here, though. Like, what happened? So there you go. In any case, Maryland finishes the season 6-6. Nothing special. They beat a few teams that maybe they shouldn't. I'm looking at West Virginia. Also looking at West Virginia. Other than that, their game against Virginia Tech is going to be really interesting. Second time this year they've played a team from Virginia, as far as I know. I don't know where Howard is. Oh, Howard's in Pennsylvania? No, that's not right. Whatever. Currently, the line is, so Virginia Tech is also 6-6. Not a very good season. One would look at the Big Ten versus the ACC, and Virginia Tech's in the ACC, right? They're not in the Big 12. Yeah, ACC. Okay. Virginia Tech, looking at the ACC as opposed to the Big Ten. I mean, Virginia Tech's got losses to Notre Dame. That kind of makes sense, although they were competitive. They got trashed by Pitt. They lost to Syracuse. Give me a break, losing to Syracuse. Lost to Boston College. Lost to Miami. Miami was on a bad year and all that too. If you look at the Big Ten compared to the ACC, Big Ten was better by far. So, I mean, yeah, Maryland gets blown out by several Big Ten teams. But the fact of the matter is that the Big Ten was just that much better than the ACC this year. So Maryland's probably the stronger team. But Virginia Tech kind of looks like they might be the stronger team. So it really will depend on whether or not Talia Tagovailoa can. Howard is in Washington, D.C. My bad. Thank you, producer, for looking that up. It really will depend on whether or not Talia Tagovailoa can put the team on his back and throw the ball around and stuff like that. Virginia Tech, I believe, is pretty decent as far as passing yards. Yeah, so yards passing. Pass yards allowed. They allow 219. Yeah, I mean, that's not great. But Maryland allows 258. The real difference here, though, is that Maryland throws the ball 307 yards a game, mostly because they need to. They don't really have much of a rushing attack, although they do get 130 yards on the ground. I didn't watch a lot of Maryland ball, but I can imagine that's Talia Tagovailoa running, scrambling. Virginia Tech, though, has 190 yards rushing per game and only 179 yards passing. So they run the ball more than they throw it. So if Maryland can stop the run and they can freely throw the ball, I don't see why Maryland can't win this game. All right, we're at 15 minutes, so let's go ahead and hit up the next team. We're looking at working our way up. Penn State, the lowly Penn State. Goodness gracious. What happened to Penn State last year and this year? They start the season looking good, looking really, really good. They go to Wisconsin. This was the big, the early Big Ten matchup that you would think that you're going to see who's going to compete with Ohio State. If Penn State goes on the road and beats Wisconsin, does that mean that they're going to be the team to compete with Ohio State down the road? Penn State does get the win against Wisconsin, ugly fashion. It was only 16-10. And then we kind of know what happened from there, but it doesn't happen for a few weeks. So then they follow that up with a 44-13 win against Ball State. And then the Big Ten versus SEC showdown to try and figure out what if Penn State was for real or if Auburn was just going to walk into their stadium and steamroll them, as sometimes that happens with SEC teams. And Penn State pulled out the victory, 28-20. Well, we all know what happened to Auburn after that. Penn State then beats Villanova 38-17. They blank Indiana 24-0. Iowa, the big mid-season top 10, top 5 matchup for Penn State and Iowa. Both teams looking really good at this point. Iowa is number 3 in the nation. Penn State would go ahead and lose this game. Iowa, if you remember, comes back late in the game. Beats Iowa late in the fourth quarter, beats Penn State late in the fourth quarter. So Nittany Lions dropped that one 23-20. And then this game, they follow that up with the game against Illinois. And I remember watching this game or watching the highlights, I can't remember, and thinking, what? I mean, Iowa was a good team. What happened? And sure enough, the Illini, somehow or another, because the Illini at this point are not exactly good. They've lost several games. But the Illini win it, and the stat here says 9 overtimes. That's a very misleading number there because they obviously went to the we'll just go ahead and lose this game against Iowa. Yeah. Because they went to the new overtime format, which is, I believe you play 2 overtime periods, 2 regular, normal, start from the 20, work your way into the end zone kind of overtime periods. And then at the 3rd overtime, they switched to just 2-point conversion plays, just one play. So at that point, it no longer revolves around skill. It revolves around, can you get at least one play in the end zone? Well, how many times have you seen like lesser teams get that one play? They get one play against the better team, and it's good. They get maybe some points out of it or something like that. Like every bad team has at least one play that goes well for them, and it's debatable on how well. But now you've got an entire overtime system predicated on or built on a situation that could come down to one play. And that's not indicative of the game. So let's say you're a really good team like Penn State. You've played 4 pretty poor quarters. You're going to overtime against unranked Illinois. You have no business losing to Illinois. Illinois has no business beating you. And you can't beat them in 2 OTs. I get it. That kind of sucks because you're not playing well, but now you've lost your chance. So it's just literally going to come down to 50-50 chance. You either get the play or you don't. Okay, it's not a good system. It is not at all a good system. You need an overtime system. I'm taking way too much time on this. You need an overtime system. Or you need to go back to the normal overtime system. I know that we're all scared of health and injuries and stuff like that. When you've got Texas A&M and LSU, I think it was, going into 7-8 OTs, scoring 70 points per game like a basketball game. I understand that we're all kind of like nervous about that. But how often does that really happen? I can think of 2 instances. It was that game, and then 2 or 3 years ago, it was Western Michigan versus Buffalo. They went 8 overtimes, and Western Michigan ended up winning it. At one point, was the longest game ever. I don't think it is anymore. It doesn't happen that often. So then they're coming off that loss against Illinois, and they hit Ohio State. And at that point, they're probably just looking at themselves in the mirror like, what's left? I mean, I get that. What's left? You know, you've got Ed Orgeron down at LSU is out at this point, or they're talking about it. It's pretty likely. You've got the USC job is open at this point, I think, or they're talking about it. The feed just locked up. Are we back? Because it's okay on my end. Give me a sign here, guys, up or down. Now it's back. All right, cool. Whew, don't scare me like that. So anyway, coaching narratives around the league are going off at this point. And so you're looking at Penn State having just lost to Illinois. And I said it on the show multiple times that I wouldn't be surprised if James Franklin at this point decided to go down to USC or LSU. And I was thinking more USC. A lot of people were saying that his name was already in connection with the USC job. And obviously that didn't turn out to be the case. But at this point, you just lost to Illinois. You lost to Ohio State. It wasn't exactly a blowout. It was a 9-point loss, but you still lost. There's nothing ahead of you anymore. And after coming off of what happened last year, what's left for James Franklin at Penn State anymore? I mean, I think he's got one Big Ten championship, but he hasn't even sniffed the Big Ten championship since. I don't know that he's actually stepped foot in Indiana since. Have they played Indiana since? I don't know. They beat Maryland 31-14. That's fine. I see. All right. Well, thanks for keeping an eye on that still, though, because if it does lock up, I'd like to know. Where was I? They beat Maryland. That's fine. And then they have a really, really interestingly good game against Michigan. They still lose because Penn State can't finish games. But this was a close game. Penn State's defense was looking pretty good for most of the game and then gave up what was like a 45, 50-yard-ish touchdown pass to Eric All, the tight end. The tight end outruns everybody for the score. It's crazy. They follow that up with a 28-0 blanking of Rutgers. Again, great defense. Offense found a way to get in the end zone a couple of times. That's good. And then they go to East Lansing and they lose in a blizzard against Michigan State. So an incredibly lackluster year for Penn State. I think Sean Clifford really could have been good in the right system. I'm actually thinking about Cade McNamara right now at Michigan. Sean Clifford and Cade McNamara, I don't think are that different in terms of in terms of how they play football, or in how they look anyway, how they look on film. Maybe they approach the game differently, but I think if Sean Clifford were in this year's Michigan offensive system, why not? I think he could have actually done something pretty good. They play Arkansas, Penn State does, in the Outback Bowl. The current line is Penn State by 2 points. So again, no one's really sure who's going to win here. I have a feeling, I have a terrible feeling actually, that Arkansas is going to win this game just simply because of who they've played against. And they've, well, you know what? Actually, I shouldn't say that, because I think the SEC is still a really good conference, obviously, but I think the Big Ten was the best conference in college football this year. I really do. I think they were. Arkansas is averaging 31 points a game. Penn State's only averaging 26. The difference here, though, is that Arkansas is allowing 24 points a game. But if you look at their last 5 games, they've only lost 1, and that one was a 1-touchdown game against Alabama. I think Arkansas is going to win this game. So eventually what I'll do is I'll put up score predictions on Twitter. We'll keep them up on the website, but we'll go ahead and I'll announce when those are up. But for right now, yeah. Michigan State 10-2. They had something truly special going. Kind of similar to what Michigan was going through. Michigan and Michigan State were both 2-4 nonsense, whatever, from last year. So a program turnaround was definitely necessary. Starting the season off strong with good wins against Northwestern and Youngstown State. They went down to Miami and beat them while they were still ranked. That's a good thing to do. 23-20 overtime thriller against Nebraska, but Nebraska was taking everybody to OT, or at least taking everybody to the fourth quarter. The one game where they started to look pretty vulnerable was against Western Kentucky, and Western Kentucky is a good passing team, and they absolutely exposed Michigan State's secondary. And that would come into play later in the season. So Michigan State follows that up, 31-13 win against Rutgers. 20-15 win against Indiana, though. This is where you kind of started to see the Michigan State offense sort of sputter, but chances were they were probably looking ahead to that following week when they played Michigan. I've talked about the Michigan game many, many times. And, I mean, the Big Ten admitted to officiating errors in that game. And I get it. Oh, you can't tell me the refs cost Michigan State or cost Michigan the game. They did. I'm sorry, they did. Michigan fell apart in the third quarter, absolutely. But if you don't overturn the Aiden Hutchinson sack fumble recovery for a touchdown, Michigan still wins 40-37. It's just math, guys. I'm sorry. It's one play can determine games, as we've seen with the new overtime format. So sorry, but not sorry. But still, but you can't take anything away from Kenneth Walker's performance. Peyton Thorne also played really well, but Kenneth Walker putting up almost 200 yards of rushing offense, scoring 5 touchdowns, making a significant case for the Heisman Trophy. Absolutely should have been invited to New York. If you ask me, though, he got snubbed in favor of Kenny Pickett. Maybe I'll have to take another look at it because I didn't pay a whole bunch of attention to Kenny Pickett until they were starting to talk Heisman for him. And even then, I was like, this kid's from Pitt. They've played nobody. They lost to Western Michigan. How is he in the running for a Heisman? You know, and I don't mean to disparage my alma mater, but come on. Anyway, Michigan State, on a bit of a hangover from that, loses to Purdue. And this is where things get topsy-turvy for the Spartans. So they then beat Maryland 40-21. As I said, Maryland looked competitive in that game. But then that secondary gets exposed again against the Buckeyes. 56-7. The halftime score was 49-0. And if Ryan Day hadn't let up from the gas pedal, this game easily could have been the first college football game in like a century or so to go over 100 points for one team. One team score over 100 points. That would be an interesting stat to get a hold of. When was the last time a team scored over 100 points? Because I'm pretty sure Michigan and Ohio State have done it. 56-7. It wasn't close. It wasn't at all close. Kenneth Walker did not have a good game. And I think that this is probably what people are going to look at when they say, like, oh, that's most likely what the Heisman voting or whatever voters were looking at when they were casting their ballots. I don't know why Kenny Pickett got that instead, though. Maybe there's something huge about Kenny Pickett that I'm not understanding. But if I were unbiased, and I'm not, but if I were, I would absolutely say that Kenneth Walker should be in New York, because he should be. He was a great player. He did a lot to pull Michigan State out of the vortex of despair that was 2020 and turn that team around, much like all of Michigan did, but Aiden Hutchinson specifically. Aiden Hutchinson gets the nod because of what he did to Ohio State and then again to Iowa. Okay, if Kenneth Walker has a game like that against Ohio State, then he's there, but he didn't. Penn State, they then follow the season or end the season with a 30-27 win. And wouldn't you know it, they're playing Pitt in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Can you imagine? The only reason they're in the Peach Bowl is because they lost to Purdue. That's why they're in the Peach Bowl. If they hadn't lost to Purdue, they would have gone to the Big Ten championship because Michigan would have knocked Ohio State out of the running. It's amazing. It is amazing. The line right now is even, but the consensus is that Pitt is going to win the game. Pitt, I believe, just won the ACC, if I'm not mistaken. They played Wake Forest, and ACC championship game. They beat Wake Forest, number 16 Wake Forest, no less, 45-21. So a solid victory right there. Kenny Pickett, All right. Yeah, I kind of get it now. Kenny Pickett has completed the ball, he's thrown 334 pass completions for 4,319 yards this season. 4,319 yards. Wow. 42 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. Kenneth Walker has 1,600 yards rushing on the season and 18 touchdowns. So, all right, I get it. Fine, I get it. I understand now. That's why Kenneth Walker's not there, is because Kenny Pickett took his place. Not Aiden Hutchinson, not CJ Stroud. I have my feelings on CJ Stroud. I get it. But that's why Kenneth Walker's not there. So there you go. Pitt right now is scoring 43 points a game and only allowing 23. Again, the ACC I didn't think was very good, but again, Pittsburgh, I mean, they've played a couple of SEC teams and beaten them. They played Tennessee. They beat Tennessee. I understand Tennessee's not good, but come on. They beat Clemson. Clemson's not good. They beat Wake Forest. They don't necessarily have that bad of a resume, and the teams that they are beating, they're beating, I wouldn't necessarily say soundly, but comfortably, I guess I would think. I don't know. I don't think that Michigan State will win the game, just because I think Pitt is probably going to be a little bit upset. Although Michigan State has every right to be upset as well. I mean, they had a season that could have meant something there for a second and then just immediately didn't because they lost to Purdue. I expect Pitt to win the game, but I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan State did. Ohio State. Let's go ahead and talk about them. We'll try and knock this out in about 5 minutes and be done at 37 minutes. All right, not bad. Minnesota, they beat Minnesota on the road 45-31. A lot of people were saying maybe this would be a trap game, and for a second it looked like it could be. Minnesota led at the beginning, or at the halftime. But the Buckeyes went ahead and pulled it out. Then the following week, Oregon. I'm just realizing now that I say Oregon funny. I wonder how you say it. Oregon. The Ducks expose the Ohio State defense. Noah Vedral, I think is his name, the running back for Oregon, the Ducks. Verdell. Upset number 3 Ohio State. So he rushed for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns, and that really proved to be what did Ohio State in. They just had no answer for him. Defensive line, defensive backs, they had nothing. They couldn't do anything. That's why Ryan Day ended up taking over play calling on defense, I believe it was. Or no, they handed play calling on defense over to the defensive line coach. They gave it to somebody else, not the defensive coordinator. And as you can imagine, the defensive coordinator got fired. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. We'll take a look at Ohio State's incoming defensive coordinator. I can't remember his name. I had it written down. They hired defensive coordinator Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's defense ranked in the top 5 in most major stat lines for the season. So they got a fantastic hire out of Jim Knowles, and you can fully expect that Ohio State defense to be lethal next year. They follow that up with an okay win against Tulsa. They did allow Tulsa to score 20 points. Again, that defense isn't looking good. Akron scored the first touchdown in the game against the Buckeyes, but then the Buckeyes pulled it out 59-7. Then Ohio State rattles off a number of dominant victories against Rutgers, Maryland, and Indiana. They then beat number 20 Penn State. They follow that up with a rather lackluster win at Nebraska. Nebraska actually looked pretty good for a lot of that game. Purdue's coming off of the top 5 upset against Michigan State, knocking them out of Big Ten contention. Could they do it against Ohio State? Unfortunately, no, for them, because I'm unbiased. Never mind the flag over here. They couldn't knock off Ohio State, but they did put up 31 points against them. So that it's another. They expose Ohio State's defense again, but then Ohio State, knowing what's at stake and knowing what lies ahead of them, goes ahead and throws up half 100 really quickly against Michigan State. It was a difficult game to watch. It really was. And I'm a Michigan fan. Okay. Like, I have my thoughts and feelings on Michigan State when I'm not on the air. I have pretty volatile, probably unfair thoughts about Michigan State when I'm not on the air or tweeting on the official Team Rivalry Twitter, which follow us on Twitter at B1G Rivalry on Twitter. I can put that in the description. Yeah, I had trouble watching this game because what Ohio State was doing to Michigan State, they absolutely could have named the score. They could have easily put up 100 points. Easily. They put up 49 at halftime, and there was nothing suggesting that they needed to stop. I think late in the first half, they were actually running the clock down to get to halftime and all that, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm not. But nevertheless, the point is Ohio State could have done whatever they wanted to Michigan State, and Michigan State had nothing. It wasn't even just that Michigan State didn't have answers. It was like they didn't have people on the field, players on the field. I'm having unfair thoughts. Yeah. Well, when I sign off, I'll have some unbiased thoughts about Michigan State in this game. And then the season finale against Michigan. And I had the opportunity to be at the game, as I've mentioned on past streams. Got to experience that with my dad, which was just awesome. This game, you want to talk about not having answers. Ohio State still put up 27 points, and Ohio State put up 27 points and still didn't look like they had any answers for Michigan. They really didn't. CJ Stroud put up almost 300 yards of passing, and yet it didn't really feel at all like they were going to threaten outside of about 5 minutes in the second quarter. Michigan went to halftime with a 14-13 lead and then took the Buckeyes 3 and out to start the second half, or the Buckeyes punted to start the second half. And then Michigan waltzes right down the field and scores a touchdown. And it's at that point that you're like, okay, I think we know the outcome of this game. Ohio State had nothing. And CJ Stroud after the game can talk about all he wants, like, oh, he was playing through a cold or something like that. You got to do what you got to do. And it was cold out there and it was windy and the snow was falling and stuff like that. Michigan was prepared. And it's not like you guys don't get snow in Columbus. Okay. You can't tell me that you've never seen snow before. You can't tell me that you've never played in snow before. Maybe you haven't. I don't know. But why isn't Ryan Day getting you guys ready for this game then? You know it's going to be cold. I was freezing. I was standing in the stands like every couple of seconds because it was so cold. And you guys are down sitting there in front of heaters. You got your blankets and tarps wrapped all around you. Like, you could have done anything to prepare for this game. Michigan had to play in it too. And it was relatively warm up until that week. So Michigan was ready. It's not like Michigan had several weeks of cold weather to get used to it first. It hit us pretty much that week. That knocked them out of the Big Ten title contention and sent Michigan to the Big Ten title game. And left Ohio State kind of wondering, what now? They've never been in this position before. A lot of those players have never been in the position before where they needed to figure out how to deal with a loss that meant that they weren't, first off, going to win the Big Ten. Secondly, even get to the game. So now they have an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl against Utah, which is actually pretty sweet. If you don't even make it to the Big Ten championship game, I think it's a pretty sweet payoff that the next best thing is that you get to go to the Rose Bowl game. Because if you ask me, I think Iowa, having gone to the Big Ten championship game, should have gotten the nod. but I understand Ohio State is the higher ranked team. And if Iowa and Ohio State played a game against each other, you know who's winning that game. Ohio State's winning that game. No offense, Iowa. Ohio State's most likely going to win this game. They're only favored by about a touchdown right now. But the Pac-12 has just been an absolute disaster this year. They've defeated Oregon twice, but Oregon kind of fell apart. They blew out Oregon while Oregon was number 3. They blew out the Ducks 38-7, and then they went ahead and blew them out again in the Pac-12 championship game 38-10. So, two things. One, the Pac-12 needs to get its crap together, because if they keep having situations where they put teams in the top 4 and then they're getting blown out against teams that aren't ranked when they play, like, what are you doing? You need to figure out some sort of stability there, but it's also not necessarily the commissioner or the entire Pac-12's fault if Oregon is on a track to the playoffs and then completely wets their pants playing number 23 Utah. So Utah wasn't unranked, but they just fell apart. So Oregon beat Ohio State. I understand that. Utah beat Oregon twice. Ohio State's a different team. Ohio State's better on offense, and Utah doesn't have nearly the resume that Ohio State has, even with the 2 losses. So I fully expect Ohio State to win this game, just because I don't think that Utah has the defense to do it. I really don't. They allowed 34 points. They lost to Oregon State. See, this is what I'm saying. They lost to Oregon State. They lost to BYU. They lost to San Diego State in 3 overtimes. This team that's representing the Pac-12 in the Rose Bowl game lost to San Diego State, a team that got blown out in the Mountain West title game. All right. So I think that Ohio State's going to go ahead and win that game, which, that'll be a nice cherry on top for an otherwise disappointing season, which I say disappointing. They still went 10-2. Like, guys, come on, that's not that bad. And I understand I'm saying that as a Michigan fan, but it's 10 games. Those people in East Lansing are telling themselves that a 10-win season is a great accomplishment. I guess 10 wins is all of a sudden a great accomplishment when, you're the one winning 10 games, and you got to go watch your main rival go play and beat the crap out of Iowa in the Big Ten championship game and make it to the CFP. All of a sudden, 10 wins is a solid accomplishment that shouldn't be looked down upon. But when Michigan wins 10 games and doesn't go to the Big Ten championship game or the CFP, it's like, oh, Harbaugh should be fired. Does anyone see a problem with this? Does anyone see maybe some inconsistencies? I'm not biased. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I went about 10 minutes over what I wanted to do. Thank you for tuning in. As I mentioned, I'm going to go make a video that's a bit more deep, or I'm going to have a live stream that's a bit deeper into Michigan winning the Big Ten, looking at their season as a whole, and then diving into the game against Georgia. Where do I think they match up well? Where do, maybe they're weak in some spots? What do I think the overall outcome of the game is going to be? Yeah. That's what the plan is right now. And then we'll go ahead and look at the bowl games for the Big Ten West, which should be a shorter video because there aren't many. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 teams from the West that are bowl eligible, which I understand is just one more than the East, but somehow or another that still just feels very lacking. Whatever. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Team Ravelry. I'll go ahead and throw you can follow us on Twitter. I'll throw the Twitter handle in the description at video's end. Other than that, have a wonderful night and go Big Ten. All right, bye.